Thanks for joining us this evening, everyone. My name is Frances Noble. This is an online talk from the Business Confucius Institute at the University of Leeds. And in a moment, our director, Giles Blackburn, will introduce our speakers. And we've just been getting to know our audience here as well. You can see in the chat where other people are joining from. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll have the talk followed by time for Q&A. So do feel free throughout to interact in the chat. And if you have a question for the speakers, if you can put that in the Q&A box, we will see that and we will come back with questions towards the end. And that's all from me. One more note is that our next talk, our annual lecture, will be in Leeds on the 24th of November, and we hope to see you then. Over to you, Giles.
Thank you, Frances. Well, good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome. My name is Giles Blackburn. I'm the director of the Business Confucius Institute at the University of Leeds. And this presentation is called The Making of a Textbook, a Chinese language resource for the modern day classroom. And the textbook in question is called Social Perspective. And this textbook helps people develop their language skills through the exploration of social issues. And we're absolutely delighted we have two of the authors here that are known very much to the Chinese studies community and especially to Leeds. Ning Yi spent 30 years, has 30 years of teaching experience in Chinese language at the University of Leeds. She recently retired, but is as active as ever. So welcome, Ning Yi. It's great to see you online here. And secondly, Esther Tyldesley. Esther got her BA in Chinese Studies from Cambridge, but then there's the Leeds connection as well. She got an MA in Applied Translation Studies from the University of Leeds. And she currently is a teaching fellow in Chinese and translation at the University of Edinburgh. So welcome to you both, and I hope you all enjoy this. Do put your comments and questions in the chat box so that after the presentations we can revisit those and have some discussion and a bit of a Q&A session. So I'm going to pass over to the presenters now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Leeds Confucius Institute, for organizing this event, and thank you everyone for joining the meeting today. Let's start the talk. Introduction to the textbook. Social Perspective is an advanced Chinese textbook equivalent to HSK level 5 to 6, divided into 2 volumes, covering 11 topics and 21 lessons. Volume 1 covers 5 chapters and 10 lessons. Volume 2 has 6 chapters with 11 lessons and will be published January next year. This is a sample of a main text with reading comprehension questions here. Vocabularies. There are about 55 new words each lesson. Each lesson covers 4 to 6 sentence patterns. The English explanation focused on when and how the sentence patterns are used. Grammar explanation also covers synonyms, idioms, and lexical collocations. E-resources include supplementary readings, audios, videos, and all answers. The supplementary reading text will be updated each year. The blue part is a video showing how the main text is played on
如何面对人口老龄化。进入21世纪，人口老龄化问题引起了国际社会的广泛关注。不仅发达国家，就连发展中国家也未能躲过其冲击。中国就是一个显著的例子。
Okay. Now I'm going to explain the first question, how this project started. There are 3 reasons. First, language teaching hours and credits reduced. In 2016, at Leeds, all graduates were requested to do a final year project, which is worth 20 credits. The students were unable to make up the credits, so we have to reduce the credits of Chinese language module from 40 to 20. As a language teacher, I wondered how we could use this short time to still deliver good result. We realized that the teaching materials and methods need to be changed. A new textbook might be needed. Second, graduates and postgraduates wanted to have a textbook to continue self-study. Third, the demand from Chinese language courses in university and school was increasing. Since the year 2000, Chinese language teaching has developed quickly in the UK. About 80% universities now have Chinese language courses, and most of them are set up by language center. They have a higher expectation, but not many teaching hours. An intensive textbook is needed. Number D is about our application process for publication. Having decided to write a textbook, I submitted the first proposal to the publisher and talked to my former colleagues about my thoughts and plans. Happily, they were all very excited and willing to get involved. I'm very glad because they all have experience in teaching high-level language courses. The publisher replies was quick. They said the proposal was interesting and wanted to discuss further. They asked many questions, mainly around what evidence do you have to guarantee that this book will be popular? All of this help us plan to become more specific and detailed, including the main features, content, market, etc. It took several months, 3 reviews, 4 proposals to get the final approval for publication. Second question, what kind of textbook do we think students need? It must be of interest to the students. Regarding this, actually, we had some good past experience. Since 2006, the 3rd year oral class in Leeds has been amended to a class discussion on social issues. We can tell from the students' feedback that they are very interested in this approach. It must reflect Chinese people's real life. In 2013, I introduced an online discussion between Leeds and Beijing. The class was very successful. Students in Beijing showed us in real time. They smoke outside the classroom and the PM 2.5 reading on the computer. The conversation was engaging and the students liked it very much. This tells us that the textbook must reflect the real life of people. The textbook should be useful for student future, linked to student study module, help students understand the Chinese society, suitable for both core module and self-learning. It should have a detailed grammar explanation and exercises. Third question, how did we select the topics? We had questionnaires screening the topics selected by students and decided on the most popular topics to ensure they are both important and interesting. For example, online shopping, food safety, global warming, and so on. We choose topics that can lead to plenty of discussion and relatively new, such as topics that have happened since 2019. They needed to cover a broad range and appeared in order from an easier topic to more difficult one. Next is about data to text process. For information collection, we didn't realize how difficult it is to obtain authors' permissions. We contacted the authors when we were already halfway through the work, but only received one response. So we decided to take the publisher's advice to write the text by ourselves. There is so much information online, but the textbook has a word limit. We spend even more time on researching, selecting, editing, and drafting. We split the work with each of us responsible for 3 to 4 lessons from beginning to end. We had a good cooperation and meetings to discuss all aspects together, such as topics, grammar points, exercises, etc. We also took turns to review each other's work several times. Finally, all the Chinese manuscripts were sent to a professional editor in China for review and approval. The English was revised. The English was renewed by Esther Tyldesley and the publisher. I have to say that we are very lucky to have Esther, because it is very important to have an English native speaker in our team. Next one is talking about how we make good use of the textbook. I think there are 3 points. A, pay attention to accuracy, and expressive skills. B, emphasize practice and learning method, step-by-step approach, from characters to words, to sentences, to paragraphs, and from reading to oral discussion to writing. And the third one is most important, is homework is compulsory. The question on this page show how the gender equality issue was reflected in language learning. So I'll try to read a little bit in Chinese. 你觉得你们国家妇女的地位如何？哪些方面进步了？哪些方面没有变化？对于重男轻女现象，你有什么看法？你认为在家庭中，丈夫应该比妻子的收入高吗？在找工作的过程中，女性遇到哪些问题？提高女性地位对当今社会发展是否有促进作用？ So this is a translation work for students from Chinese into English and from English into Chinese. And also I'll try to read a short paragraph in Chinese one. 中国近几年来，女性就业难问题相当突出。例如，在一些招聘会上，招聘人员常常会问前来应聘的女大学生，能喝多少酒，准备什么时候恋爱结婚。而不少女学生为了求职成功，就慷慨答道，白酒能喝一瓶，30岁以前不考虑个人问题。这明显透露出女大学生在求职中的种种无奈和心酸。So conclusion, Chinese language textbook generally do expire as the society progress. Language teachers should have a responsibility to update teaching materials and improve teaching method following movements and changes in society. Thank you.
Okay, I will start my presentation, which is slightly different from Ning Lao's because I came to this project in a different way and with a slightly different roles and responsibilities. So, my name's Esther. I'm the junior partner in Social Perspective. I'm the latecomer, but I was brought on board because, as you can probably see from the video, I'm not a native Chinese speaker. And my speciality as a teacher of Chinese is explaining the bits that you can explain more easily if you've learned Chinese the hard way as an adult. So having experienced the study of Chinese from beginners to advanced, both as a learner, this process is still ongoing, by the way. I'll stop learning the day they nail me down in my coffin. So I've experienced Chinese as a learner, but also as a teacher, which means I've spent a lot of time both experiencing the difficulties with language learning, and I've also experienced explaining these difficulties in ways Western students can digest because I've been there. So that's why I was allowed to take part, and it's a great honor that I've had this chance that I can be here. So I'm going to take this from a purely personal perspective, talking a bit about what learning Chinese was like for me as a Qilingho, as somebody born in the 1970s and studying in the 1990s, with all its benefits and all its flaws, and why I think books like this are important and why it's a source of it should be a source of great pride that as a country, Chinese studies is now in a place where a mainstream academic publisher like Routledge can take on these books expecting to make a profit. So we've come a long way from what I'm about to tell you about, where the early 90s, where Chinese learning was kind of in its infancy. When I was signing up for Chinese and when I was just starting, yes, reform and opening had been going for well over 10 years, but this fact had not filtered through to the UK. China was not really liked or really understood in the UK, certainly not where I grew up. Everyone who's in Leeds will understand what I mean when I say I grew up in Harrogate, and the response to wishing to do Chinese was not brilliant, actually. It was definitely a minority interest. You were immediately branded as a wild-eyed eccentric for straying off the nice safe path of French, German, Spanish. And say you did have a strong desire to stray off this path, there were then very few chances to learn. Only about 7 or 8 universities were offering Chinese in any form. And though the numbers in those classes, even in Leeds, were relatively small, I was part of a year group of 10, and that was considered unprecedented and possibly dangerously large. So it was very much a minority subject, and that was reflected in the teaching materials and sometimes in the teaching methods as well, I think. In early 1990s, I hadn't really caught up on what there was out there in China to explore and love. So there we were, arriving at university, and we got sat down in a classroom and made to learn. So the teaching materials certainly did exist. It wasn't the case that there was no communication. But of course, 1990s was seriously pre-internet. Even quite old school teachers like me who like to hand out handouts would have subconsciously become very used to having everything stored online or on disk, and you can just download it and print it out. It wasn't really like that when we were learning. Teaching materials were very limited by the fact that China just didn't seem to have that many books on sale, full stop, that the market was much smaller, and that China had other fish to fry. So there were basic textbooks coming out of China and others available in the UK, which could walk you through the main grammar points and a lot of the most important words, but those kind of petered out fairly quickly, especially if you were trying to learn Chinese fast, which as undergraduates with just 4 years we had to do. So then, you know, you've got to the end of your basic grammar teaching textbooks, then comes lots and lots of reading. Certainly the university I did my undergraduate study at was all about reading. I think possibly some of the teachers were still really thinking that if you went into Chinese studies, you did so for research purposes. So they needed to get our academic reading to a really high level. What we as students, of course, wanted was to be able to get out into China and explore and see marvelous things. So there were conflicts there. Because the texts, of course, were chosen by the teachers and geared very much around their own interests. And I have to say a lot about around the People's Daily as well, which then as now is not everyone's cup of tea. And it used to be a lot worse back in the day. I can remember struggling through a lot of economic texts and, you know, not being able to sound them out, but not enjoying the experience. We were also limited by the worst photocopier that the world has ever seen, which resided in our department. So once we got into the realm where we passed beyond the textbooks, teachers were having to supply everything, in short, and not you know, not all the teachers were really up for providing things that would suck students in and make them want to learn more. And say they could provide this, the photocopies we then had were often not of the best quality. I tried to create with my own phone camera an equivalent awful photocopy, just to give you a feeling for what it was like. The software flat out refused to do that. So you'll have to take my word for it. Instead, for those of us who are a bit older, a brief blast from the past. Here's practical Chinese reader, inhabited by these two main characters, Gubo and Palanka, who went to China and had very staid and sanitized adventures. And how shall we put this? The books were actually really good. Looking at them now, I can see they instilled the basics of grammar really well, but they weren't fun. And Gubo and Palanka were such monsters of being perfect students that they weren't really inspiring people to get out there and see what was to be seen. I'm not saying this to knock my old university, because they did get a lot of things right and we came out with some real skills, but the practical didn't feel that practical in New Practical Chinese Reader. Everything in it, like Palanka's flares and Gubo's unusual haircut, seemed very far away from anything we wanted or were doing. And of course we had oral classes and we did get some time abroad. It wasn't the Cultural Revolution when we couldn't go to China, although it was assumed that we wouldn't want to spend a full year there, because we could then get back to we got half a year, because we could get back to the serious business of learning classical Chinese and history and doing some really advanced reading in academic modern disciplines. We did get oral classes. They were very popular because we, as a middle to advanced students, we were back from China. We'd seen a lot. We really wanted to communicate our ideas with people. But with New Practical Chinese Reader, and then lots and lots and lots of literature and 人民日报 and things like 小二黑结婚, some quite archaic texts. This didn't give us a lot of chance to integrate what we were reading with what we were saying. So we were not very, we were prepared to talk about anything, but we couldn't do any of it very well, and we couldn't do it in an adult way. And sometimes in China, you really do need, after a while, to talk like a grown-up. I found in China, when I lived there, that I was appreciated very much when I was almost completely incoherent. But as I started being able to communicate more, you reach a sort of awkward teenager point as opposed to cute toddler. You know, if you're really rubbish at Chinese, people think you're lovely. If you're not very good at communicating what you need, you can become an embarrassment. So there comes a point when you're talking about serious issues that affect the world, the generation gap, population issues, sexual equality is always a good one. You need to get beyond the 我觉得这样不好，我不喜欢, to a point where you can say things like 我个人认为哈，这样做不利于, and then whatever it is you're trying to explain why it's a really bad idea. So we had the vocabulary, but we had no framework for it, and we talked like babies. And it took me years to get over this. So we move on. What I did in those intervening years isn't nearly as interesting as the contrast that books like this, see my book? I have a copy of a beautiful and wonderful book, compared with what, you know, the context in which we can bring out this book. So teaching in 2021 has changed a great deal. To begin with, if you're doing Chinese these days, instead of being regarded as an eccentric and possibly dangerous loner, this is considered to be a very sensible career option and potentially a moneymaker. The status of Chinese has risen as people are getting a bit more clued in as to the stuff that's going on in China and that the money that's out there, I'm afraid, as well. We have much bigger classes. This approach of spending a lot of time just reading and the teacher slowly correcting your mistakes and gradually you improve really doesn't work in classes of 30. It certainly doesn't work in classes of 60. There's a lot more courses. I was so delighted when I was looking up facts for these PowerPoints to find that there are 35 universities in the UK offering Chinese. When I filled in my UCAS form, there were 7. It's not many disciplines that can say that universities offering them have increased 5-fold in under half of a working life. It's a real achievement for Chinese. And of course, it's not just quantities, because if everything had continued being taught the way we were taught, although we did come out with real skills, and in particular, a really positive attitude to reading difficult texts that I struggle to induce in my own students, there is no doubt that teaching now has become more professional. This was a change that was starting while I was at university, but isn't, professional teachers with an actual education background are now the norm instead of the exception. There's a lot more in the way of PhDs in this field, in textbooks in this field, of general understanding of how education works and why, how education works in Britain and in China and how to bridge that gap. We have really come on. I'm also delighted to say that Chinese is taught in schools a lot more than it used to be. It used to be just a handful of places. Now loads of schools, state and private, are taking this on. And there are teacher training courses in the UK that are turning out locally based teachers with local understanding of how Chinese works. So they're raising a next generation of Chinese scholars in a way that makes it much easier for people to think about studying Chinese at university. So, in short, there is such a thing as progress. It's hard to believe in this day and age, but it's happening now. Teaching materials are on the way up, but we've still got a way to go, I think. The Mainland is producing a lot of material. There's a lot of variety. It's much easier to find a textbook, and often a pretty good textbook, especially at the lower intermediate levels, than it used to be. But we tend to get the same topics recurring, and there's a kind of, some I can totally understand why they're not going there in class, such as Tibet. Nobody talk to me about Tibet, please. I'm done with that subject. It causes far too many arguments, but they do tend to come back to the same things about the economy and China's many achievements and many wonders. There's a lot of things that Gubo and Palanka from New Practical Chinese Reader would be very comfortable talking about because they're safe. And when reverting to culture, it always tends to be the same thing. It's always Beijing opera. It's always Chinese knots and jiaozi. There's no exploration of street food in other areas, or paper cutting instead of Chinese knots, or, other kinds of music, contemporary music. We always seem to be going back to these same topics. And our locally produced materials are often, although not always, aimed at the beginners. So this is why, when we move on to take a look at our nice book, this is why when I saw social perspective and I saw the plans, I immediately thought I want in on this, because it is delivering a lot of the things that scholars of my generation really didn't get. Advanced grammar, structure, idiom based around interesting topics. Now, the advanced grammar, the structure, and the idioms are all really important communicative tools. But it becomes harder to sell these sometimes to exhausted final year students, when you're in the first year, every word you teach them is new and important and adds to their communicative ability. When you're doing the advanced stuff, by its very nature, all that stuff you can use everywhere isn't present anymore. And so necessarily we're dealing with more abstruse things, things you can't use all the time. And the hook to draw them in has to be well-chosen topics. If you can look your students in the eye and say, stick with this lesson, and you will learn something wonderful, you will learn something interesting. This will really help you understand why people talk about this all the time. You've got them. So in Social's perspective, I've got the first one because that's the one that's come out. We have a combination of ever popular topical issues such as the status of women. We're never going to stop talking about that in my lifetime, I fear. About the economy, which is so important to everyone heading out and into the job market, the environment, for reasons that should speak for themselves. So these are always topical. They appear in the Western media and people kind of expect them. But interspersed with this are also issues that students really want to know, but they don't know that they want to know them yet. So things like food safety, which of course is a massive issue in China, mobile phone payments and all the ways in which mobile technology and screen technology is changing our lives. Issues about university, well, we've all done about being a university student, but there's a very interesting article in volume 2 about a poor student who decided to study archaeology instead of a money spinning degree, even though she was top of the class in her province at Gaokao. And the debate around this, is this a luxury she should expect to have, or is she a mad idealist? So I think the fact that we have a book like this and the fact that we're at a point where a book like this can turn a profit and can easily find a publisher, I think, as I said earlier, is a sure sign that there is such a thing as progress. At least if we stick in our little corner of Chinese studies, things in Britain definitely are still getting better. And so I just want to finish with a moment of quiet pride. There we are. There's the lovely book. There's my name on the cover. There's Ning Yi's. And we've come a long way. There's a long way to go. As Ning Yi says, no textbooks stay current forever. We're going to be always updating, always improving. But we've come a long way and we should be really pleased about that. And that's all for my presentation. So I'll stop sharing the screen and we can move on to the question and answers, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, both. That's really interesting and good to hear both sides, really looking at the textbook and the contents and the process, and then Esther bringing to life as a learner and a teacher through time, how this fits into that timeline for you. So if you do have any questions, please put them into the Q&A box for us. We have Alison's question popped up here asking about how the online part of the textbook works. So Ning Yi, I remember we saw an example, didn't we, of a video with it jumping through the audio. Is there any more you can tell us about the online aspect of the material for this textbook? And Ning Yi will need to unmute again now.
Yeah.
We've had a couple of positive comments, one from Babette, who said, Ning Yi, you were her teacher at university. Lovely to see you again. And Giles commenting on the positives of having a textbook that students will want to read because it's interesting in itself. So yeah, is there anything you can tell us about the online part of the textbook and how that works?
Or how that works? And because we need to download a tool and put the text, the text, the word on that, and they use the tools then to make the recording and whatever. But anyway, I can't describe how did that make but I can pass the link to you, and that is not very difficult to make the sound and the video later on, but not now. I have the link as well.
And do the online materials, is it additional texts adding to what's in the book, or is it kind of allowing people to hear a text out loud, maybe content that's already in the book?
So we make that for each lesson, and they put that online, and the student can use that and practice, because that is we thought that is quite the convenience for students to follow that. But they just made a video and they upload on the website.
Yeah, and from that example, I can see how it would be helpful to help with reading and following. So talking about the digital aspect of the tool and reading, a question for you, Esther, about paper books. You said you're still a fan of paper, but do you consider them to still be useful now in an age when students are reading everything on devices?
Well, if you've ever seen my house, you're not surprisingly, there's not a bookshelf behind me, but the whole place is full of books. So I have a personal bias here. But I think that there's a number of reasons why it's useful to have a textbook. First of all is because if you've got a textbook, it's all physically in one place. You don't have to waste time searching for keywords or looking for it or finding tabs and losing tabs. You can pick it up and carry it around, and then if need be, you can make notes on it. And for those of us here who are students of Chinese, have had to learn to write it, you'll know that the doodling and the making notes and the copying things out again part is a very important part of reinforcing characters. The other thing, of course, is if you've got a physical book, then everybody knows exactly where page 22 is, and they can go to the same place. I can see how a time might come where we're going to be completely textbook-less, but I think there's something about picking up a book that makes you feel, right, it's class time now, here's a textbook. And I do think that as long as we're still using our hands to learn Chinese characters as well as our eyes, it's going to be a very good idea to have paper that you can make marginal notes on and draw on and make comments on. This is just my personal view.
Yeah, I'm sure people have different preferences, don't they? And Zach has asked, first of all, he said, Ning Yi, you taught him his first Chinese characters, and now he's a Chinese teacher in London. So there's another good story, like.
Right.
And so his question here is, he noted how, Esther, you said that some topics are being regurgitated and they appear from textbook to textbook, and just ask, is there method in this, or do you think they have had their time? Will they have their time?
I think some things never go out of style. I mean, the women's equality is the classic issue, because there's so much, there's so much going on and so many botched and successful ways in which things have improved and regressed. So, even, this, people will keep talking about women. I also think some, there's a national pride thing. Everybody wants to write about the Great Wall because if you've seen the Great Wall, it's amazing. Peking opera is a cultural jewel. It's just that I think there's another thing going on, which is that teachers talk to each other and say, well, my lesson on Peking opera was really good. I brought a tape in or whatever. That shows my age, doesn't it? I brought a CD in, I brought my speakers in and everybody was amazed. Or, we had a really fun oral class about who are you going to marry? Or we had a really intense discussion about the one-child policy. And so these sort of get passed down anecdotally, as it were, and people get the idea that this is a topic that's been done and so we can do it again because it worked. I don't think it's always malicious. I think there's also in Chinese writers a laudable wish to put their best foot forward, which sometimes sits uneasily with the way British people talk about their own country. I think there's a cultural clash there. And I think that the Chinese writers have picked really good topics that are controversial, but which can be discussed honestly without hurting anybody's feelings in class, including those of the teachers.
That's good. That's interesting because, yeah, like you said, you've got the teachers and the students, and you want to really stimulate and have an interesting debate with everyone feeling comfortable about that. Yeah, interesting. Ning Yi, a question for you here. Where can we buy the book? Have you planted this one? 我们可以在哪里买到课本呢?
To be honest, I don't know, but I found someone said the Amazon is cheaper than other the bookshops or companies. And also the question asked how many characters, right? So use this book. I think this one is reach to HSK 5 to 6, but I think it's something like Leeds as a third year student. So that is between 4, HSK 4 to 5, and can be started to use the book.
That we did have a couple of questions beforehand as well of people asking if it would be suitable for A-level studies or people just coming out of A-levels. Does that mean it might be a bit difficult at A-level stage? You and other teachers will know better than me.
Yeah, so I think this is also this textbook is also suitable for the A-levels, because when we decided to write the book as for already considered them, and because they actually the A-levels equals that the university, something like between the HSK 5 to 6, right? So I think that is definitely suitable for A-levels. And also we prepared the two volumes. So for some students, for some the schools, if they think 2 is too heavy for them, and they can just pick one volume and study it for 1 year. And if, for example, in Leeds, I think that is the credits and also the university's degree course, so they can use the 2 volumes for 1 year. So each semester, just 1 book.
Great. Yes, people are finding it online. It's available on Amazon and other bookshops as well, I think. That's us with pre-U disappearing soon. Could this potentially become a new qualification? What do you mean, Zach? Do you mean this book become a qualification itself? I mean, I'm sure that would be great if you could. It sounds like you've got one enthusiastic teacher here ready to try the book anyway. I I was wondering, actually, you mentioned, it sounded really interesting, Esther, the story you mentioned about the university choice of degree and class, and the essay in the second volume that talks about that.
Mm.
So you said that, Ning Yi, you explained how you couldn't just easily use texts and get permission from authors, so you had to write your own. So how did you go about doing that? Were you almost kind of journalists looking for interesting stories and going to the primary source of the story, or did you use texts as examples and try to create something similar? I'm not sure which person's best to answer that one.
So I'm not sure. I can't get what exactly question is.
So when you were writing the essay for each chapter, were you was it like being a journalist, finding the story to write about?
Yeah.
Where did you find those stories?
Oh, where I need to find the stories, and most all of the resources come from the newspapers, online resources, and BBC, and the other books. So we just put all of the interesting things. Then it's decided how to so actually it's get the main idea. What do you want to say in this chapter or in this lesson? Then it's just put all the materials together. Then we have a lot of discussions, as I said in my presentation. So then it's after discussion, we have make a very clear what we want to put in this lesson. Then it's just they come out the stories and the other things anyway.
Great. Well, hopefully we'll get a chance to have a look and read some of the stories in the book, and more people who are listening in today as well, I'm sure will be interested to look in more detail too. I'm going to put a link to our short feedback form in the chat, so please do pop onto that and let us know what you thought about the talk this evening. Yeah, thank you very much to Esther and Ning Yi and everyone who's joined us here. Giles?
Yeah, time is just about up, so I'd like to thank Ning Yi and Esther for joining us today, and for everybody who joined to listen in and put your questions. So today we've learned really about the publishing process for a textbook, how a textbook is put together, the rationale for content, and I think in particular we'll probably all agree that textbooks should be so much more exciting for students nowadays compared to what they were before, particularly with these social issues. So I think it's a really exciting and innovative development. So thank you to our speakers for joining, and